This week on the WYP podcast, Colin and I are joined by pro licence holder Mikey Harris, a coach who has worked at all levels of the game, from setting up his own successful grassroots academy to manager of Conference National League side Salisbury City. More recently, Mikey was the lead professional development phase coach at Category 3 Academy Portsmouth, before joining Category 1 Academy Brighton and Hove Albion in the same role. After a successful 2 years at Brighton, Mikey was appointed by the FA as in-possession specialist coach for the England under-18 squad. He talks to us about these experiences and reflects on how his possession-based philosophy has evolved over time. He gives us an insight into the processes involved in preparing a team in order to gain a competitive advantage and the importance of developing trust and cohesiveness in a multidisciplinary team. We hope you enjoy the conversation. Afternoon, Mikey. Thanks for joining us today.
Afternoon, gents.
So perhaps if the best place to start is maybe giving us a bit of an idea about your journey, your past experiences, and what's led you to your most recent role with the FA as in-possession coach.
Yeah, sure. I'll just share my screen, so we've got some visuals. Is that working okay?
Yeah, yep. Perfect.
Lovely. Okay, so yeah, just want to have a brief overview of my journey to date. So hopefully it will give you a little bit an understanding where I've come from, and hopefully some of these things will relate to you as individuals. So the first thing to say is I went to university, like all of you guys. So I know there's sometimes a view that you have to have had a really famous playing background to make it as a coach. I certainly didn't have that. Very modest playing background. I played non-league football up until the age of around 23, and that's when I started to focus solely on coaching. So I had some time at Salisbury City FC as assistant manager alongside my time at university, and during that time I started my own business called Wellow Soccer Academy, and I was actually working as well part-time with Portsmouth Academy with the younger age groups. So first message from there is to get out on the grass and do as much as you possibly can. I was coaching 7 days a week. It was before I had children, before I had any real responsibilities, and I think that time is really important to get that time on the grass in your early stages of your career. From being assistant manager of Salisbury, I eventually became the manager, which was obviously a different dynamic altogether and a different experience. And with that came some media opportunities. So did some TV work, some punditry work for covering the conference, and on a couple of occasions the FA Cup, which was really good. And again, this is all kind of part of the skill set needed to be a coach or a manager at this level. After a fairly successful season at Salisbury, I then moved to Portsmouth to take their PDP phase. So I was lead PDP phase. So I worked with their under 18s, and we created a 23s group in which we entered into the Premier League Cup, competed against the Category 1 academies, and got to the semi-final of the Premier League Cup. So again, these just demonstrating that you can sort of overcome barriers, and you can compete with top clubs even with little resources if you're resourceful yourself. And we had some success at Portsmouth. We won the League 2 championship under Paul Cook and got promoted, and it was a fantastic experience. And all the time during this period I still had my coaching business, although I'd stepped away from it in terms of my contact and had other people running it. But again, in football, it's good to keep options open because you never know what can happen. From Portsmouth, I had the opportunity to move to Brighton to take their under 18s, and obviously a Premier League club, really forward thinking, really dynamic club, fantastic role, fantastic people, really enjoyed it. And again, along that time when around that time when I was joining Brighton, I was actually completing my League Managers Association diploma, and the Brighton Academy manager was on that course with me, and I believe that certainly helped me to get that interview for that role and to ultimately get that role. So kind of the message there is, when you're on courses or when you get opportunities to maybe go into clubs in normal scenarios. I appreciate that's difficult, the current situation with the coronavirus, but any opportunities to network and stay in touch with people and to gain a positive reputation in the game can only help you when it comes to going for interviews and jobs. Put a picture of my son in there. That's my little boy Charlie, who's a little bit older than that now, but again, just as time goes on and life goes on, you move forward into different phases, and those sorts of things, like having children will impact on how you see your career and how you see the game. And also he's made me a better developer of people, I'm sure, so you can learn from it as well. After that, my time at Brighton, I actually got onto the FA Pro license. Was really fortunate to be on the course with some top people, some more well known than others. Obviously, I'm sure you'll all be aware who Steven Gerrard is, and Peter Schmeichel and Matthew Taylor, people like that. But also some really, really good people that you may not have heard of on the course, likes of Aaron Danks, who is head of specialist coaching at the FA. Adam Lawrence, who's just moved to Manchester United as under 16s coach. So a real amazing group of people, and very grateful and fortunate to have been involved with that cohort. And I think, again, similar to the Brighton situation, I met Aaron Danks on the course, and an opportunity came up to apply for the job with the FA, and I managed to get it. So my role with the FA was in possession specialist for the under 18s, and I can safely say, sort of singing the national anthem was in my first game was one of my proudest moments of my career, and something that I'm very grateful to have experienced. Unfortunately, due to coronavirus, my contract at the FA was cut short. So I was made redundant at the back end of last year. So I've now had some time away from the game, which is the first time in 16 years for me, which obviously is a long time, having been involved in the game professionally on a full-time basis for that time. So it's given me an opportunity to reflect and to think, which we don't really get too much of in the full-time professional game. So I've tried to use it positively, maintain network with people that I know in the game, so that if any opportunities do present themselves, then hopefully you hear about them. And I've been through a couple of interview processes which have been unsuccessful, but again, in terms of the process and part of my journey, that's been really positive and a great learning experience. So again, don't be disheartened if you apply for things and you get turned down. Just always ask for feedback, always take what you can from it, and move forward better for the experience. So yeah, that's a sort of whistle-stop tour of my journey, and hopefully gives you some context as to my experiences to date. Hope that's okay for now.
That's great, and your career, I guess, shows a really nice progression from your own personal community business that you've run for a number of years. Then you've got, obviously, working at Cat 3 Club. You've also got non-league, and then you've got Cat 1, and then obviously your most recent role with the FA, working with your team. As an in-possession coach, are you a believer of you've got a fairly fixed philosophy and ideals about how the game should be played, and that regardless of the context, whether it's non-league with Salisbury and you're trying to win games to get promotion, or whether you're at Brighton or Portsmouth in a development sort of arena, can you apply that philosophy, your in possession philosophy, consistently across each of those different environments, or do you need a level of flexibility to say, actually, Salisbury need this, Portsmouth need this, England need this? How have you managed that progression from sort of community, grassroots, non-league, all the way through to sort of the pinnacle at national level?
Yeah, really, really good question, and I think it's probably not a straightforward answer. I think to talk around the subject, certainly you put the individual and the player at the center of what you're doing, in my opinion. So I think if you're working at the top level, so if we're talking at England have a very clear DNA, a very clear philosophy of how we would want the game to be played from an in possession perspective. However, within that DNA, there is certainly license for individuality, and for players to express themselves. My personal view is it's a bit of a utopian sort of situation. Like if you can go and get the players that you want, then great. You can have a really clear philosophy, and go and get the players to fit that philosophy. When, for example, I was at Salisbury, without being disrespectful to the players that you're working with, you haven't got that luxury to go and get those players. So I think in that scenario, you have to be really adaptable and really flexible, and work to get the best out of the players that you've got at your disposal. And that means, certainly at Salisbury, we had to be very, very aware and very knowledgeable about what the opposition would present, and how we could impart our game on them, and maybe challenge some of their weaknesses and be aware of their strengths. And so I think it's important to be adaptable and flexible, because I think that's the reality of the game, and it evolves all the time. So things are changing all the time. It can change from week to week, month to month, and you've got to keep up with that. But also, I think it's really important you have some level of clarity in your philosophy as well, and kind of how I accept that they're almost contradicted. That's almost contradicting myself there. But I think to outlay it from my personal view, and this is not necessarily like the England view or anything like that, I like my teams to be quite structured in their approach in what we would call the build the attack and the create the attack phase. So probably from the goalkeeper and then through the middle third. But then in the final third, less prescriptive. So I think sometimes it's about getting to the final third, and then when you get to the final third, you want to empower your players and give them the feeling that they can go and express themselves and bring to the table what they offer. So I'm not a big believer in real structured finish the attack type sessions. I think it's more looking at the players, what are their strengths, what are their super strengths as well, if you've got top players, and how can you create those opportunities for them to use those super strengths. But as I say, the caveat on that is not too structured in that final third, because you want them to be instinctive. You want them to be able to play with freedom and to express themselves, really. So does that make sense? Hope it answers the question.
Yeah. Can I ask a kind
Sure.
of follow-up with that one? You talked about your philosophy, and you had all the things that the variables, the context change this month, that month. Let's talk about the controllables that you have. So you have your philosophy, and then you have your skill set as a coach. And in that 16 years, hopefully your skill set in actually affecting behavior, improving players. How did that kind of coincide with your actual philosophy on how a team should play. Did they work together? Did you change your philosophy based on your own skill set, or is your skill set improving, changed your philosophy?
Yeah, really good question. I think all of the above, probably, Colin. So I think if I think back to my own sort of coaching journey, and I think back to when I started, I think everything I did, or how I worked, and everything I wanted it to look like, I wanted it to be really structured. So I wanted everything to be, I wanted a clear strategy, didn't want to deviate from that, wanted the players to fit into that, wanted to be real clear, almost ideological, I guess, about how you want to play and what it looks like. And then I think you learn that that's just not reality, and you start to realize that it's not all about you and what you think, and you're probably not always right. In fact, you're definitely not always right. So then you start to have to involve and engage the players in that process, learn from them, learn what they're the ones that are out there playing the game. They have to buy into what you're trying to do. And the best way, in my experience and in my opinion, to do that is to involve them in it. Be really authentic. Create an environment where they can be really authentic, and you get honesty that goes 360. And yeah, you sometimes have to give a little bit of your philosophy up to get the best out of people sometimes, I think.
Were you capable of doing that in your younger, coaching years? Because what we tend to see in our in a coach, especially young coaches, and I say we, I include myself. We see whoever the top of the game was. Maybe it's Pep, maybe it's Klopp right now, whoever it is, and we go, I want my teams to do this and play this way. We as teachers and educators might not be able to deliver it, and we're trying to treat our teams, which probably starts out in a grassroots, in a different way, and we don't actually have the skills capable of doing that. So how is were you able to include and involve these players at the beginning, or did you even think about doing that?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you look at that example that you've given, I think it's easy for young coaches to look at the likes of Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola and go, right, that's how I want to play. That's how my teams need to play. But I think the first message, and this is really important and something that I feel really strongly about, is we're all different. Everyone is different. And I think, of course, you want role models to look up to and people that inspire you and that you can learn from. And can we learn from Pep and Jurgen Klopp? Yeah, I'm sure we can. But it's really, really important to be you and to be authentic. And I think there's a danger if you try and copy, as you say, Pep, Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp, to use your examples. They would have started out in a very different sense. They won't be the people or the coaches that they are now. They wouldn't have been like that 20 years ago. So it's an evolution, and it's something that you have to go through. It's your own individual journey. It's no one else's. And I think it's really important to work with that and not fall into the trap of, right, I'm going to try and be like Pep Guardiola and I want my grassroots teams to play like Pep Guardiola. Well, the reality is the players you're working with won't have the skills and abilities to do that. Or if they do, you're very, very lucky. B, it's not the same game, in my opinion. If you're talking about 5-a-side, 7-a-side, younger age group soccer, 9-a-side, even 11 aside, under 13s, 14s is not the same game as the senior game. It's very, very, very different. So making sure that how you work is appropriate to where you work, and the level and the age and stage of the players that you're working with is absolutely vital. Because if you misinterpret and misunderstand that, and you're trying to work with your under nines like a Premier League manager would with his first team, then what you're going to be delivering and what you're going to be how you're going to be working is not going to be appropriate. In which case it's not appropriate for the players, so it's not the best thing for the players, so therefore by definition it's not the best thing for you as a coach. So I think that's really, really important to understand the needs of your players and where they are in their journey.
It's nice to hear how your philosophy, I say the word philosophy, it's almost become a buzzword. But it's nice to hear how it's evolved with the experiences and the places you've worked. So you talked about that Salisbury might have been a bit more pragmatic based on the level quality of players you were working with. Portsmouth, very honest, hard-working, disciplined club, and the identity of the club. And then at Brighton in England, you've still got that framework, but there's less prescribed, I guess. So it's nice to hear how the philosophy, there's probably some core principles that you believed in, but other bits around that have changed and evolved and adapted according to the context, the players and other things. Because I see a lot of the time, and you'll see it on social media, young coaches coming into the game, it's all about game models and philosophy, and they want to micromanage every little aspect of performance. Well, actually, what you've learned from your 16 years is that as long as you've got some ideals, so I would tend to call it ideals as opposed to philosophy, because ideals, depending on who you're playing and what the context of the situation is, they might vary slightly, so you might change a few bits, whereas a philosophy is very set in stone. This is what I believe, no negotiation. And if you're Pep Guardiola or Klopp and you've got the players to be able to do that, then great. The reality is that a lot of us don't work in that way, so having core ideals which guide the way that you want to see the game played, both in and out of possession and stuff, but then having that theatre around that, I think is quite a nice thing, and to hear the way that you've evolved that approach is really good.
I think on that, if I may, Millsy, I think it's a really, really good point that you make there, and I think philosophy is a dangerous word, and it can be kind of misconstrued. I think that you can also have a philosophy that is part of your philosophy can be to be adaptable, if that makes sense. So I think it's really important to do that, and I think I like your terminology about ideals. I think that's really, really good. Like, these are the ideals, and this is what we would really like, but that's not necessarily what might happen. I think for me, my experience is I've probably got quite strong principles related to the game. I would say that's how I would describe it. And interestingly, I think there's probably maybe a perception from younger coaches, or I certainly would have thought as a younger coach, as I progressed through my journey and things got more, I went to a higher level, that things would get more complicated and more complex. The reality is it's the other way. So as you go through your journey and you're exposed to more games, to more situations, things certainly in my mind and from my experience have got simpler. So the game has, rather than being more complicated, and you think, wow, when if I get a pro license, I'm going to be able to do all this fancy stuff. Well, the more you come back to it is that the simple principles of the game don't actually change, and the brilliant basics and the things around that are what's important. Also, it's important to note, we're discussing this from I guess kind of like a head coach or a first team manager's perspective, where we're maybe dictating that, but you may have, and you certainly will have, going through your journey, times in your career where you have to work with or under someone else who has a very, very clear philosophy, and your decision is, am I willing to work with that person and to go wholeheartedly into their philosophy with probably the appropriate challenges at the right time. So I'm not by any stretch saying, just becoming a yes gaffer, I agree with you, gaffer, even if you don't. That's not good for anyone. But if there's someone with a real clear philosophy and you're going to work in that environment, you have to accept that, and you have to be 100% into that as well, because otherwise it doesn't work. So I think that's important to mention as well, that it depends where you are in your journey, how you have to deal with philosophies, I guess.
It's kind of a rhetorical question, but do you think your understanding of the game and the principles, as you increased your knowledge, it made things more simple for you and you were able to then convey it? I mean, that's kind of sounds, the two go in hand. The genius person is someone who can take something very complex and explain it very simply. And sounds like during your path that's kind of what
certainly wouldn't put myself in the genius bracket, Colin, that's for sure. But no, I definitely feel I mean, it's the same as anything, isn't it? Coaching is a skill, I think. Interpreting the game and analysing it, and then being able to take that and then put something into practice from it is a skill. So by nature, if you are of a growth mindset and open-minded, and you have the ability to self-reflect, which we all do, and we should do more of, by the way, you will by nature evolve and adapt and get better at it, I think.
I think going to sort of your role around the in possession focus, I just want to pick up on something that you mentioned in your introduction around the courses that you've been on, especially in this current state we're in at the moment with lockdown and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You said about the fact that on a lot of the courses that you've been to, you've met people or you've created a network which perhaps in retrospection has sort of led to other opportunities or doors opening. And I think we would talk about the 70-20-10 principle of 70 is experiential learning, so learning on the job and the experiences that you gain. 20% is the networks and the informal learning of creating connections and stuff, and the breakouts on formal courses where you're having a chat with someone. That's where the real value. And then it's the 10% is actually the formal stuff. So in terms of your development and looking back on a lot of the courses that you've gone on, so pro license is the highest qualification you can achieve. In this time, we've now had a year of lockdown almost, or at least sort of semi-lockdown. How important has that network been for you compared to sort of the formal stuff that you can do?
Oh yeah, incredibly important. I think just to point out, there's value in both for sure. I've always been a serial formal learner, in terms of it was always my goal to get my pro license before I was 35, and I just about managed that. I always wanted to do the LMA diploma. I always wanted to do as many courses relating to football or around the disciplines of football as I could. I like the achievement of it. I think that's something that relates to me. But I think your point is spot on. It's those formal qualifications courses that you do that then open the door to the more informal stuff, because by nature, if you go into a course or you enroll on a course, then you've got a cohort, so straight away you've got access sounds like a terrible thing to say, doesn't it? But you understand what I mean. You've got a gateway to people that you wouldn't have met or you might not have come across, or you've got people from all different backgrounds, from all different experiences. So you're in a room with real cognitive diversity, which I think is really, really, really important. And that's one thing that I've learned during this time more than anything since we've been in lockdown, is just how you've only got to look at people's opinion of this whole situation we're in. I can speak to 4 different people who have got a completely different view on the coronavirus, the pandemic, how it's been handled. And each one of those 4 people could provide a compelling argument that seems very logical, but they could all be at odds with one another. So I think that there's value in understanding that people think differently to you, and I think that can be taken into a football context, to have people around you, staff, coaches, that are of a different personality, that do have different views, do have a different lens, that will maybe see something that you won't. Because I think there's a tendency, we all like to be around people that are like-minded, and you hear a lot about that. Oh yeah, he thinks the same as me, or yeah, he's sometimes I hear people say the phrase, oh, he's one of us, things like that, and from a cognitive point of view, and you just think, well, we're missing something there, 100%. And I think there's obviously a lot of and rightly so, a lot of talk around equality and diversity, and the positive impacts of that, and making sure that we give equal opportunity to everyone. And I think that is also the case for cognitive diversity. And again, those two will go hand in hand, because people from different races, from different backgrounds, with different experiences, will look at the world and the game in a slightly different way. And if we can bring all those people together and get the best bits of everyone, then there's massive gains to be had, in my opinion, from that sort of approach.
Definitely agree with that. So maybe if we go into the role that you had at England, we've talked about, you touched upon the England DNA.
Yeah.
You could maybe talk about the building the attack, creating the attack, finishing the attack, and what were the sort of key performance indicators or things that you would look for when either planning a session or identifying a player that could fit into that sort of style of play.
Yeah, is it okay if I bring a slide up just to maybe illustrate it? Okay, has that come up okay?
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so I think I really like this visual, and this is something at England we used and would still be used now through all the teams, from 15s up to seniors, to plan sessions and game plans. So I think this is a really good reference point and a really good resource in terms of looking at what is it that you're trying to get out of the session. So for example, if we're working in the build the attack phase, we will have obviously a lot of work at international level goes into opposition analysis. A lot of work goes into watching the players within the pathway at their club, so you have a real understanding and a real knowledge of their strengths. And what we would then do is take all of that information, because you've got time. That's the key. The difference between working in a club and working at international level is you've got time on your hands between camps to do the level of detail research, which then impacts on your selection of players, your session planning, and then your game planning. So this is really useful in terms of a reference point, as I say. So for example, we might be working on build the attack, and we might be looking at, okay, the team that we're playing against is particularly narrow, so we're going to take what they offer us and we're going to look to play around them. So you can see in the build the attack phase, we'll be using lanes 1 and 5, and we're talking about how we get the ball into those areas to play around, as a very simple example. In the create the attack phase, again, now we're working into the middle third of the pitch, really, and we're looking at how we, again, in working with England, we would talk about how you can create wide diamonds. So again, in the picture, depending on what formation you're playing, those players that you can see the shirts in the diamond positions could be, for example, if we're looking at the right hand side, that could be the left back. In the wide position, it could be the 4. In the deepest position, it could be an 8 in the middle and a 11 or a left winger in the pockets between the lines. As an example, it could be centre half, winger. There could be all sorts of interchanging players there, but the principles remain the same. Can we create wide diamonds? Can we create an overload in the middle of the pitch? It's really important as well that we have players that are willing to and looking to run beyond, because if you've not got players that are running forward to threaten the space behind their back line, then it becomes harder to get players in between the lines to get pockets. And obviously, if you're playing a team with a really, really high line, and you've got fast players that are adept at timing their runs to get in behind, then that's a priority, probably over finding players in between the lines, which obviously is a bit of a fashionable thing, getting players in between the lines. Yeah, well, that's great, but if you can get players behind their back line and in one-on-one on goal, that's probably preferable. Maybe a personal thing there. And then looking at the finish of the attack phase, which obviously has a little bit more detail, the 5 ways to create and score at the bottom there. We had discussions over whether there should be more than that, or whether that should be broken down into other things. One thing that I was quite passionate about was, I think, sort of rebounds. The ball coming off the keeper. I did a project around rebounds and how we coach that better and become better at that, because particularly non-UK keepers like to parry and punch, and there's opportunities to score from that. So that would probably come into there somewhere. But you would use this to help with your session planning. So it might be that because we're trying to play around, we're going to work on wide crosses, and we develop a session that works in those areas for the wide players. But then for the strikers, if we're looking at wide crosses, then we're probably looking at getting as many bodies into the triangle as we can, because we know that the majority of goals are scored in the triangle. And we'd look at the timing of the movements and what that would look like. And then you get into technique of finish and varied finishes, and try and give the players repetition, but repetition with variation. And that would be, semi-opposed, opposed. You might do some unopposed technical stuff. I personally don't do too much of that, because I don't think it's as game relative, and I think with this level of player, you want some sort of opposition and decision for them to have to deal with. And then the final slide is just an overview of the whole in possession principles, really. So as you can see, the 3 thirds broken down: build the attack, create the attack, finish the attack, and a look forward and play forward mentality. So we don't want possession for possession's sake. We want to play forward at the best opportunity. And obviously, if you're playing forward quickly, then that tends to lead to a higher tempo. But we want to control the tempo. We want to dictate the tempo, not the opposition. So at times, if we need to show control and patience, because that's what the state of the game requires, then we have the ability to do that as well. The numbers represent 5 lanes. So we can work with players in each lane. So we talk about all-time width, which you can see in the finish the attack phase. So that's having a player in every lane at all times when in possession of the ball, so you can use the whole width of the pitch. And then the last little bits are kind of self-explanatory in terms of dominating possession and territory in those highlighted areas. And then, you know, the toughest part of the game and why the strikers are paid the most money is the create and score bit. So and the arrows around the outside are just relating to whether to retain and build or to progress and penetrate and how fast you do that. So that's kind of an overview of how we would plan sessions and then ultimately the game plan, because the sessions that you do will link to the game plan and your outcomes in relation to that. Does that make sense, chaps? Do you want to ask any questions around that?
This is a wonderful visual for us in America. For U.S. soccer, we call them roadmaps. Other people might call them frameworks, for you to be able to observe the game. And you talked about the analysis. So obviously you took this on board, being part of the England DNA. Is this going to be something that you take into your next role? Is this going to be how you observe the game? Or is it something that, oh no, I have my own philosophy, or I have my own ideas on how I view the game?
So I think, again, it depends on the next role, I guess. If I was to go into a head coach's role or a manager's role, I think I would definitely use this this resource. I think visually it's great. I think if you look at it with some depth, I think it allows most principles of play, and I think, yeah, for me, I would definitely use it. There might be slight tweaks, again, relative to the role, but yeah, I would definitely use it. There's the caveat on that is this is England's DNA and framework. I might go into a club which has a very different framework and a very different strategy and principle. So if that's the case, then you have to adapt to that and to buy into whichever organization you're going to work with, if you believe in it, and obviously if you don't believe in it, then the chances are you're probably not going to be in that organization, because I think clubs now, especially at the top level, and international organizations and national teams, the process that you have to go through to get a job like that is very robust, and you'll know enough about one another as to whether there's a fit for the club.
So he needs to be one of us, huh?
Yeah, touche. Yeah, I guess what I mean by that is if a club has a really clear principles of play and a real clear strategy, and that's made very clear to any person who wants to work within that organization, if you're completely at odds with that, then you know it's not gonna work, I would suggest. So I'm not saying you have to be completely, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not saying it's a complete case of yes sir, yeah, I completely agree with everything you say, yes gaffer, we'll do that. I think there needs to be the appropriate challenge in the right way at the right time within the four walls of the office or the staff environment. But what I mean is, if you're going into environment with something that is really clearly, for example, if you want to, your philosophy is want to play out from the back at all costs, and we want to play through the thirds, and we never pass over 20 yards as an extreme example. You're probably not going to go to a club who wants their goalkeeper to kick it as far into the opposition's half as they can. So yeah, there's room for flexibility, but I think there's certain principles, as we talked about earlier, that will be non-negotiable for some people.
I think it's like values-based recruitment, isn't it? Like, you might not necessarily agree with the certain aspects, but the values that you sort of explain or deal with that conflict can actually lead to a good thing.
Definitely,
it's that challenge and support framework that we want to try and get right. This the finishing the attack. If we could just ask a couple of questions about that. So,
sure.
What you said earlier to the visuals now, it's very clear that this is a framework, and you can see all of the principles of play. So from an attacking perspective, you can see penetration, support, creativity. There's lots that links to the principles of play. In your role, would you ever sort of delve deeper into some of these things? So, for example, you've got in the box cross there. Now, what I like about that is it's not saying you've got to do a cutback or you've got to do a stand up. It's an in the box cross, and it depends on the position of teammates, space, opposition, all those sorts of things as to which one you choose. So again, it's a framework, and there's a level of ownership on the part of the player to select the technique that's the right for the situation. Now, when you were working with these players using this framework, would you ever go into depth on, say, passing or running with the ball, or how they might turn in a certain situation? Would you ever drill down into the sort of finer details?
Yeah, really, really good question. I think first and foremost, yes, you would, in terms of the players' strengths or super strengths, like I spoke of. So if I think back, I can think of some players that were in our squad who from one player to another, an inbox cross would probably look very different in terms of the way it was executed, or indeed the way that they get themselves into a position to cross from within the box. So I think having an understanding of that and a dialogue with the player as to, what does an inbox cross mean to him? Because I might have a view of an inbox cross and what it looks like that's very, very different to his. And equally, the striker that he's crossing the ball to might have an expectation or a theory of what that might look like. And if those two don't align, then your chances of success are going to be less than if they did. So I think that's the skill of the coach and the detail that you want to get into when it comes to those sorts of conversations. And I think the key, the starting point is having those conversations. Stimulate it with video, with discussion, and get some real insights into what does an inbox cross look like for player A versus player B, and how does that link in with the strikers? So yeah, of course we would go into that detail. The difficulty that you've got in an international setting is lack of time. Now, when I say lack of time, I'm talking about lack of time on the grass, really. So that's where you have to be creative and utilize the time that you do have on camp to coach them in different ways. So coaching isn't solely limited to on the grass. An informal conversation in a corridor of a hotel can be as powerful as any session, if you ask the right questions, and you have the right discussions. So I think a lack of time, because you probably spend 50 days with the players in a calendar year, whereas in a club setting it's probably closer to 300. But equally, the intensity of the time that you spend with those players on camp, because you're all in the same place, so you're basically living together wherever you are for that period of time, that does afford you time in a different way, and it's about using that to the most efficient way you can.
Yeah. So a lot of your work with players is sort of on a one-to-one basis, and it's facilitated through analysis. So if you're really going to address technique or some technical components to their game, it might not necessarily be the conventional on the graphs work. It might actually be more personal, one-to-one, video-based work that you're doing between camp.
Exactly, and then I think the importance of having the dialogue and the relationship and the feedback with the clubs as well. So you're almost kind of forming a little bit of a support network for the players. So they've got the club coaches, but also international coaches. But there's a dialogue between those two, because otherwise it can become very much separated. So, my coach for England says this, but my coach at my club says this. Well, then that can be divisive and can be quite negative. So it's important to manage that relationship and be transparent and open with the coaches that the players working with on a day-to-day basis. And I think that can be really powerful, because I'm fortunate enough to have been in both camps. Obviously, as a club coach at Brighton, we had players within international teams, and having dialogue with those coaches that were working with them and saying, do you see the same things that we see, or have you noticed anything different, or what do you believe his super strength is, or what did he do well, or those sorts of that dialogue between international and club coaches is really, really useful. And that was something that I was really mindful of when I went to work for England. I wanted to have that dialogue with the club coaches. So I think that's really, really beneficial to the player if it's done in the right way.
Yeah. And I like you've touched on it a couple of times, like a strengths-based approach, or focusing on what their signature or super strength might be. So that, like, positive psychology. And I guess that fits with your role. You're an in-possession coach, so you're always thinking about how we might be able to win a game or dominate possession or whatever it might be. Whereas if you were maybe on the out of possession side, it might be the opposite. So in terms of the analysis between camps, what does that look like in terms of, I guess you would have a long list and a short list of players that are in and around that sort of level. How would you analyze them, sort of keep tabs on them, look at them, and then sort of integrate those signature strengths or the things that they can offer to the team? What would that look like? Is it you doing the analysis, or is it someone providing you with clips and you watching them, or how did you do that?
So I think if I can answer the question in relation to sort of more normal times, so to speak, a lot of my role and the role of the other coaches in between camps, once the review, first and foremost, we'd have an extensive review of the camp, which would last a long time and go into a huge amount of detail, both of the games and the training through the camp. And then feedback is collated and distributed to the players and the clubs, and obviously within the England system there'll be some objective feedback created for the players. And then, as you rightly say, there's a long list in terms of the age for each age group, and that list would be monitored and changed at regular intervals. But there'd always be a list of players that would basically be being watched and monitored. And part of that process would be us as the coaches going to games. So I was quite often going to 4 to 5 games a week when not on camp. And if you think the other coaching staff are doing that, and then also talent ID reporters would be collating and putting reports into the insights department, and then there's very clever people within that department that kind of collate all the information, and is a fantastic new system which the FA created over a number of years and is just kind of getting into full flow now, which gives coaches and analysts and talent reporters access to data, players' games, clips, all those sorts of things. So all of that, it's a huge operation, and all of that would then go into creating the selection, and then obviously from the selection you have a long list, and then that goes to a squad, and then when you've got the squad, when we're coming to sit down and talk about a squad, we will have a really, really good understanding of what each player brings to the table, what their strengths are, and ultimately they're getting, if they're being called up for England, it's because they're doing something really, really well for their clubs. So what you want them to do is, when they come to England, is to continue doing what they do really, really well for their clubs within the framework that is kind of on the screen now.
I've got probably 2 more questions really to ask. With being an in-possession coach, was your focus when you was watching players or analysing games, did it almost work as you would watch the opposition at sort of what they were doing out of possession, because you were looking for ways to exploit their weaknesses potentially? So it almost, although you're in possession coach, you're looking a lot of time at what you're doing out of possession, because you're looking at what the opposition are doing with the ball, so you can exploit those opportunities when you do regain or win the ball. Is that what the process that you looked at? Because we've had a performance analyst, an ex-student of ours who's working for the Danish FA. He showed us a model, and it always started, he looks at the opposition first, always, and then from there it would then filter down to like team, unit, individual, and so on and so forth. Now, obviously, my experiences, like a lot of your experiences prior to working at the FA, was in academies where they might say to you that you've got to play a certain formation. So they might say you've got to play 4-3-3. So really, for me, I don't really look at the opposition first. I'll probably look at us. Are we getting what we're doing right? Because I can't change. It's not as if I can notice something in the opposition and say, right, let's play a 5-3-2 because I've noticed a weakness. We've got to make sure we do what we do well first and foremost. But when you're in your level of work and you're trying to win games and European tournaments and qualifications and stuff, is it very much that process of let's look at the opposition first, identify weaknesses, and then let's come up with a plan to execute an in-possession style of play that can exploit that? That's a long question.
No. I think I get it. So definitely at international level, you're watching the opposition. Generally speaking, the majority of teams that we may play, particularly the smaller nations, and this is a sweeping generalization, it's not always the case, but usually would be sort of low block, very, very defensive, very compact. and very difficult to break down, because the level of coaching around the globe now, at international level, you're looking at small margins, everything. Gone are the days where an England team plays against a smaller nation, and it's not professional, or they're not tactically aware. Every team you come up against at that level are well organized. They're well drilled. They're hard to break down. So you're looking at small margins. So I think it's almost kind of, it's not wrong not to look at the opposition, but I think first and foremost, and I don't know the analysts that you're talking about from the Danish side of things, but I think first and foremost it's kind of like respectful. I think you got to start with, okay, we have to have a level of respect and a level of awareness about the opposition, and then from that moment on, when you've got that level of understanding that you need, then of course it's about controlling what you can control, and that's your team, and how you set up, and what your principles are going to be, and what you've worked on. And so I think we probably worked at England, and it would probably, again, sort of, there'd probably be a bit of a dichotomy in terms of, if we're playing a top nation, top nation, it might be we're focusing maybe 30% on them and 70% on ourselves. If we're playing maybe a slightly lesser nation, it might be 20% on them and then 80% on ourselves. The predominant thing, as you can see from the framework that I've showed, is what can we do, and what are we going to do. However, that does link in with your understanding of the opposition. So for me, and always throughout my career, wherever I've been, I've always been quite big on opposition analysis, because I think it's, as I say, it's respectful to the opposition, because any team that you come up against and any individual can cause you a problem at a moment, and I think you need to be aware of that, and you need your players to be aware of the appropriate information, not all of it, because you have to filter what they get. But for me, that's really important. But ultimately, it's about what you do. But I think that information then potentially drives what you do. So it's important to know.
Yeah, and there's no wrong or right, is there? It's
absolutely not.
Some focus on the opposition because they think that's their opportunity. So you look at Mourinho, for example. He doesn't necessarily have a fixed philosophy. He plays to win games, so he'll adjust certain things based on the opposition. Whereas other coaches will say, no, this is what I believe in, this is what we do, and we focus on us. We make sure that we're at our best. I think
it's. Oh, sorry, mate. Go on.
I think what I like is what you guys did with the England setup. Is there was probably an acknowledgement of the benefit of both, and you said like it'd be 70-30 or 80-20 or 60-40 depending on the opposition that you played. So there wasn't we often work in extremes in coaching, don't we? We often work at one end of the continuum or the other, and we focus on us or on them, but you sort of slide that scale depending on the opposition you're playing and maybe some other variables, which is quite a nice example.
Yeah, and probably just to add to that and to finish off, I think when you're looking at that as an example in terms of how much you look at the opposition and how you do your analysis and things like that, it does fundamentally come down to what does success look like for your organization, because if you're a first team manager and you're Jose Mourinho, success looks like winning games, winning trophies. So your approach will be of a manner and in a way that hopefully gives you the best chance to do that. If you're working in an academy, and success is developing individuals for the club, for the first team, or to get them to align with a philosophy, and it's less about the result, then again you might slide that more towards it's more about us and what the player needs at this stage. So I think when you're doing analysis, I think the examples that I've given there have come from a point of very much, we're looking at winning games, but it's not as simple as that, because you're also looking at, in different contexts, what's our focus. It might be to develop individuals, it might be to develop a unit, it might be to develop a team. It comes back to, why do you do what you do? We'll start with the end in mind. What does success look like for us? And then how do we get there? And that's why we're doing it. So we always got to come back to that, because otherwise you just end up preparing to win a game.
And that came out in what you've said already today. So your philosophy, your value of the final third, how do you finish your chances is, well, we're less prescriptive, I think was the exact word you said. It needs them to problem solve. So if problem solving against a low block, you can't tell every player team, this is what they're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. No. You need to solve this.
Yeah.
And if it's on the us, then you're going to focus in on how can we be better. So even your viewpoint on how, or the English DNA, came through in the oppositional analysis or lack thereof for some matches, which is interesting to hear that come into life.
Cool.
I've got just one last question, because we talk a lot around multidisciplinary teams, and I think probably working for England as an age group coach, you were probably exposed to probably one of the biggest multidisciplinary teams I've seen from one standalone team. So you've got in possession, out of possession head coach, you've got loads of support staff. As you were only responsible for one aspect of the game, the in possession stuff, how did that all come together, and sort of how did you work in that interdisciplinary approach where what you saw fed into what others saw, which then led into the bigger, this is how we're going to play, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, really good question. Did I find it a challenge? I would say probably no, because I think the specialist coaching model lends itself to collaboration, really, because I think that myself as in possession coach, I would work closely with the out of possession coach to plan sessions so that we're almost, we would call it pack coaching. So I'm coaching up against him and he's coaching against me to drive the standards up. So I think from a coach to coach and the inter coaching technical side of it, I think it works really well. And in terms of the multidisciplinary stuff, I think I've had I've had more than two experiences of it, but my last two experiences have been, one, as you say, with England and working with a multidisciplinary team, and two, at Brighton with a multidisciplinary team, which I think at Brighton, by the time I'd left, I think that the MDT team was awesome. It was really, we had a really good, the dynamic was really good. The communication was really good. Everyone had a voice. Everyone contributed and had positive impacts into what we were trying to achieve. And it was really good balance of challenge and support and respect for one another. And that, to try and create that international level is more of a challenge because of the lack of time that you spend together, because you're on camp and then you don't you have a few meetings in between, but you don't have the opportunity to have that day-to-day contact to really kind of really develop those relationships. And as I say, it was only probably towards the end of my time at Brighton that we'd got that really right, and that takes months, sometimes over a year, 18 months, 2 years to really get right. But the good thing is, at England and at Brighton, and to be honest, everywhere I've worked, I've been very lucky. You're working with really good people who want the boys or whoever you're working with to do well. And I think if you work towards that common goal and you work together and you have that dialogue, you know, if I was planning a session, I would sit with, we would call it in England the PPC coach, so physical performance coach. I would sit with the psych. I would sit with the analyst, and I would say, okay, here's my ideas. This is kind of what I want it to look like. You know, Ben, what are your physical gains that you want to get from it? Well, I want them to try and hit these markers, and I want them to be exposed to this conditioning, and et cetera. Okay, so how do we factor that in? Okay, let's collaborate and create a scenario where you win. Okay, you know, Muggs as the analyst, like what have you seen in the opposition? Well, I've seen that, so I might not tell him what I've seen because I want him to give me his information, and he might go, well, I've seen that they drop into a really low block, but you know, I feel like the left centre half might be a little bit weaker than the other one, so maybe we can target him. And I might go, yeah, that's what I thought, so that's good, that validates what I'm saying. Or I might go, oh, not seen that, that's interesting, I'll go back and have a look at that. Oh yeah, he's right, I didn't pick that up, or whatever it might be. It's back to that kind of cognitive diversity piece again, really, of getting everyone's thoughts. I mean, when I was at Salisbury, when I was manager at Salisbury, I used to get all of the staff to write down their team and their formation. Always, every week we did it. We could come into the office, we have a cup of tea on a Friday at the end of the week, and I'd say, come on, everyone write down your team. Everyone write down your team, who you'd pick, what your team is, kit man included. And every now and then, you know, you'd go, but you had to justify it. So that was part of the challenge, right? So you can't just put a team down and go, that's what I play. So you know, assistant manager go, I'd play that team, and I don't tell them my team that I'm going to play because I might not have decided it yet, depending on what they say. So the assistant manager comes in, this is why I play. Well, why would you play him, not him? Well, because he's been like this in training this week. Okay, now I might go with it, I might not. You know, and then you get to the kit man, and obviously people will go, what do we bother asking the kit man for? You know, and the kit man would go, wow, I wouldn't play him this week. Or why wouldn't you play him this week? Nah, just been in and around the changing room. He's not right. His head's not on it. Not sure. Something not right with him. And sometimes you go, yeah, whatever. And other times you go, yeah, maybe he's right. You might think about it. You might reconsider. And there's times where I would have changed what I was going to do or my thought process based on feedback from other staff, and maybe less extreme. But there might be times where someone says something that you go, all right, I'm possibly not going to change my team, but I'm going to have a conversation, and I'm going to head something off before it happens. So the kit man example, yeah, his head's not been on it, he's not right. Well, I might check in with that player and go, listen, everything all right? No, to be honest, Gaffer, you know, my dog died. Right, okay, so you've been a little bit off it. Yeah, well, how are you feeling about tomorrow? No, I'm bang on for tomorrow. I've just had a difficult week. Right, brilliant. So now he knows that I know, and we're all right. If you don't have that conversation, maybe he doesn't perform as well. So all of these things, it's not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. I think the skill of any leader is firstly to gather every last bit of information that you can possibly get, and then filter out what's useful and what's not useful, and then have enough humility that if you're wrong or your initial thought process has been challenged, that you might want to change it. But you only do that if you've got good people around you that are honest and you trust. And I'm very fortunate that I've always had that. So
that's awesome example of leadership. you made people feel valued, and frankly, the banter is I know, not being with the team right now, the banter amongst the staff, whoever they are, coaching, non-coaching, that's the fun part.
Oh yeah.
So, but you using that knowledge and that information, I like the word you use. You said gathered, not take, but you gathered that. You now gave value to the kitmen to be able to go, okay, I now want to go and find more information. I want to be able to feel like I'm helping the team. As you said, everyone wants to be a part of that. That's awesome.
And I think it's really important as well, just on the next part of that. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but just at some point acknowledge that. So, you know, I might not every time go, oh, I did that because of you. But at the right time, at the right moment, you might say, do you know what? You influenced that. And they might be like, what? What do you mean? Well, you know, that conversation we had, well, it led me to do this, and that might have helped us win the game today. So, you know, thanks, well done. Be grateful for the people that you've got around you.
Hey, you haven't let us know last year, a year ago today, or I guess tomorrow, you ran a training session with our current third years. We were trained to get prepared for Russia. We've done the scouting. You've given us the speech and the analysis at I think we're in Palmerston, and then we went out at Test Park and we ran the training session. Did we win the match? I mean, what was the result? Did it end up, or because if I remember correctly, the session went the way you wanted it to.
Well,
did we get the result?
Well, thanks to coronavirus, the camp was cancelled, so we'll never know. Yeah, we'll never know, Colin. But yeah, no, that was unfortunately that was pretty much. Yeah, I've not done a lot of coaching since then, so yeah, that was pretty much the end of it, thanks to this pandemic, which is a shame. But obviously, there's more important things going on in the world.
And I thank you for you were one of the few that when I said, hey, do you mind if I give you an iPhone? I want to record this so we can have your audio attached to the video that did not work, but we still have the audio. So if you want to hear yourself coach again.
No, thank you. Do you know what? That's one of those really awkward things, because what I would say on that is it's horrible to watch yourself back. It's horrible to hear yourself back, but my God, it's a good learning tool. It is really, really, really good. So yeah, I'll always, I've been mic'd up a few times for sessions and watched it back with my head in my hands, like, oh my God, did I say that? Is that how I look? Is that how I talk? But you've got to push through that uncomfortable feeling, because the gold that you get from it and the self-awareness that it develops is very, very helpful.
Tremendous, mate.
The strength of the MDT as well, I think, is something is based on, I think you had it with the FA, sort of a common language and a common terminology that you share. So there's a clear clarity and sort of understanding around what you're discussing, which sometimes is undervalued. We might talk to us and say we want certain things clipping, but we don't actually then, we might be saying something and they're not understanding the context or what we're after. So that clear, joined up language that we all understand and we all adhere to is really important. And I think you might have an example of some of the terminology.
Yep. Yeah. So I can share that with you. This is sort of a bit of work we did around the FA, where we were looking at common language, really. So this was, myself, the other in possession coaches and the head coaches, we would have meetings about how we were going to sort of refer to things and what language we would use. Because if you imagine, if you're a player coming into the pathway at, say, under 17s, and a coach uses a certain terminology in a certain language, and then you go up into the 18s or the 19s, and that is said in a different way. So, for example, You know, if I said, you know, you might say, right, we need you to play in behind. Another coach might say, we need you to play beyond. Another coach might say, we want you to play over the top. Might want you to play down the sides. You know, we want play behind their backline. Those are all different ways of saying the same thing. And we're also conscious that obviously from a national perspective, you're pulling players in from different clubs who will have different language. None of it right or wrong, just different. So we decided that it would be very important for us through the pathway to have common language and ways of describing things, so that the players have that consistency through the pathway, and it helps them to understand. And again, for the analysts, they use the same terms, just to make it really clear for the players. And that slide has got the some examples of some of the language that we thought was really important. So I think again that's something to consider if you're working with academies and different teams. You know, having agreed language is probably something to consider.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for your time this afternoon, Mikey. Really appreciate it. And obviously, your experiences and your level of understanding around in possession is really valuable. So really appreciate your time.
No, thanks for having me on.
Yeah,
I think you were invited to do a session. Was the coaching voice? Was it Solon possibly going to do a session?
Yeah. So again, that was all good to go, and then we hit another lockdown. So hope to pick that back up at some point in the not too distant future. But obviously, at the moment, it's not allowed. So we just have to wait. But yeah, hopefully at some point that will come back up.
Well, as always, last year, as Colin's referred to, was a fantastic experience for our students, not only from a theory side, but he also gave up an additional day to come and then put that into application and show them what that session looked like, which is fantastic. So as always, really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for your contribution to the content of the course.
No, thank you, and I look forward to coming back and doing some practical stuff when we're allowed.
And best of luck for the future going forward as well.
Yeah, likewise to you and all your students. All the best, everyone.
Thanks, Mikey.